Hi, everyone. So as I was saying, our challenge team was disrupting policymaking. And can you just, and what does that mean to disrupt policymaking? And as we are coming all from different countries and backgrounds, so Lauri as a disability and disability policy and accessibility expert from Finland, Leila as an charity manager from the UK. I'm trying. Chougher from the Voice of Europe Youth from UK as well, national level, like local level, personal level, and me from a local level in France as like a gender equality officer, like organizational, institutional perspective. So you can all imagine how can like we disrupt if we all have like different standpoint perspectives and on the process and the stakeholders. But we do found like a common ground, and like I think that we all share that, but I'm just coming back to that. The lack of diversity, equity, inclusion, access, belonging, the opacity of organizations and institutions led to the lack of trust, because we do not trust like the policymakers, actually, even if we are stakeholders. And it also led to like inefficient policies. So that was like, okay, we agree on that. Does this make a challenge? Like, I don't know, Lauri will explain that to you.
Yeah, some of the challenges that we identified were, how do we encourage pluralism in policymaking in order to create policies that are both long-term and forward-looking? How do we prioritize accountability and evaluation in a way that transcends election cycles in order to respond to some of the more daunting challenges of our age? We think that the 4 pillars of inclusive and efficient policymaking, we didn't steal this, I promise.
We are all architects.
Anyway, we believe that policy should be human-centered, pluralistic, and living, which I believe Leila will expand on later. I realize it sounds cryptic, but she'll get back to that soon. We also find that it needs to be, as I said before, backed up by robust accountability and evaluation mechanisms, with this all being underpinned by the principle of long-termism, of long-term thinking.
So start off with the pillars we came up with. The first thing we really focused on was the human centricity of policymaking. So it's just the idea of involving people and making humans the center of our policymaking, but also not leaving out the social, economic, historical, and sociological contexts that surround these policies. So really taking into account marginalized people that are left out, but also involving their contexts equally as well, because those need to be involved on equal terms, and one cannot be left out without the other.
And what we mean by pluralism is gaining meaningful input from as many kinds of stakeholders as possible, from a really broad range of actors, from grassroots organizations to elected officials and researchers and beyond, in order to create a broad base of support for policies that really everyone involved can try and get behind and take ownership of.
Thank you. The idea of living policy is something that we discussed quite a lot, and it's just to treat policy as a living thing which can and should be able to change. If we are thinking about long-term policies for long-term change, for the most daunting issues in society, as you said, Lauri, we don't think it's appropriate to have policies constrained to the context of the day that they were written. You know, we do have policies that are so forward-looking into 2030, 2040, 2050, and I don't think it's right that we should have them stuck to what we said in 2022. So we need to create mechanisms within the policymaking framework that allow policy to be agile enough to respond to change in a world which is changing more and more every day.
And this also goes back to the evaluation and accountability. And this is more like on organizational level, like the policymakers, the civil servants, but also the elected representatives, they are like taking decisions based on data that we're gathering. But who decides how is this data gathered? Like for in my case, like study, it's about gender. And sometimes in some contexts, we do not know. We just talk about citizens. Are they men, women, non-binary people? So it's also like coming to that. Is there like age groups? So it's really coming to that and to bring this like to light, like the studies that we are using, because these studies, like who are making these studies? Like the ideologies behind the studies. How do you define like integration, cohesion? And so it's really important also to make it accountable. Okay, we are taking decisions. We are based on this kind of knowledge. So you should know that. So it's also about that. And also the participatory evaluation. And it's coming back like to the living policy that relies on the agile methodology that is very used on the private sector. The idea that, okay, let's try something to the client, let's say the beneficiary, and like, do you like this policy? Is it working? And the feedback is that, no, it's not working. So let's try it again. Let's like do it something different. It's really like this idea and coming like from intersectoral and intersectional joint committees. So this, I know that will be questions about how we are going to do that, but the civic engagement group will go there, I think. And just like about the transparency as well, it's about the availability of the documents, reports, consultations, budgets, because at some point we were speaking that, oh, but the information is there. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it is, and it's not accessible. So the idea is like also to maybe, I don't know if it's possible to make it a law or like really a principle saying that we should have these websites, these, I don't know, officers that their job is to say, okay, ma'am, I do want to know how did you decide to build this school? And we have all the information and the access to it. So it's really this idea of evaluation and accountability and thinking that we must be accountable like to the beneficiaries, not only citizens, but the beneficiaries of the policies. So yeah.
I briefly mentioned long-termism. And what we mean by that is, well, it's a term that actually started a long, long time ago, or it's an idea that started a long, long time ago. The term was actually coined in 2017, I think, by two scholars from Oxford, but it's an idea that comes from the Iroquois Confederacy of First Nations people in North America. And what the impetus for their thinking was to always have in view not only the present but also upcoming generations and building that into everything that they do. So making sure that we're not just scoring quick points, making sure that we are really thinking about the world that we want to create, making sure that we're really thinking about where we want to be in the future and not sacrificing future growth for current short-term gains. Making sure that we have policy that is robust and strong enough to transcend election cycles, making sure that multiple stakeholders have a feel that they have that they share in the creation of policy, that they have created policies that they're proud of, so that it can last the test of time and not sort of fall away with regime change or administration change. That's something that we think should be underpinning everything that happens in policy.
So, as you saw and as Roquia sort of briefly explained, we did come from very, very different backgrounds. So one thing we also agreed on, which really helped us sort of ground our ideas and sort of work better while we were preparing this presentation, was a good practice that we chose, which was the Sustainable Development Goals. So we believe that there are lessons to be learned from the Sustainable Development Goals negotiation processes, as it reiterates the importance of delivery, again, as Roquia was explaining, and especially developing accountability processes to ensure meaningful progress. And I think we do see a lot of that in the SDGs. And as it says in the UN's The Future We Want report, sustainable development can only be achieved with a broad alliance of people, governments, civil society, and the private sector, all working together to secure the future we want for present and future generations. So I think this is something we need to consider and reconsider while we're thinking about these practices.
Thank you. We've called this good practice and not best practice because we really want to stress the importance of delivery and evaluation. Evaluation without acting on the lessons that you've learned in that process is so important. And this year's Sustainable Development Report, which measures progress on the SDGs, has found that for the second year in a row, the world is no longer making progress on the SDGs. It was great. The negotiation phase was great. The implementation phase, the delivery phase is very much lacking. And I think that we really need to prioritize what we actually do with the information that we gain when we evaluate policy, making sure that it's living, making sure that it's agile enough to change when we realize that something's not quite working. Or maybe it is working fine, but there's a way that we could do it better with, you know, all the good things that development brings. We need to make sure that we're using all the tools we have to, you know, make global change. So thank you. We just really think it's important that all parties feel that they have a stake in policy. We think that there is a great place in society when people feel that they have a sense of ownership over what their government is doing, and engagement with as many groups as possible is only going to increase that. So I would like to invite any questions and just thank you for your time and your attention.